Thank you. So this is my talk on the dangers of technical debt and over-servicing. And it's one of those ones that I worked back and forth on over the last couple of months. I think I annoyed Tony when I put through my submissions, because quite often what I put in the submission is very different to what I end up talking about. It's basically whatever is most annoying me at the time ends up becoming the story, because that's the thing that I'm most passionate about. This is one of the few where what was submitted is now, a couple of months later, the thing I'm actually talking about. Which is technical debt. And I'm not specifically going deep into technical debt. I think it means a different thing for most people in most organisations. Same with over-servicing. They're very hard terms to define, but I'll try my best. This is my 5th year speaking at XWorld, which is amazing for me. Thank you so much for putting up with my crap for the last 5 years. It is a kind of yearly therapy session, group therapy session that I really look forward to each year, to just kind of get through some of the issues I've been trying to define, really, I would say. Like, a lot of the times I've found that there's something that I can tell is not right in our organisation, but I can't exactly put my finger on it. And once I've been able to talk about it at a place like this, it generally means I can, really easily talk about it in meetings and emails and things after the fact. So, for that reason alone, XWorld has been incredibly good for me to be able to get through and just kind of focus on what are some of the issues that I see repeated in various organisations. So, I have last year I had a talk called "Quit Your Job," where I said just quit, like, move on, move to a new location, and learn from that new location. Because having worked in my previous university for about 5 years, I could see that there were lifers. There were if you've watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the kind of Scully, and who's the other one? Hitchcock and Scully. Yeah, every IT department has a Hitchcock and Scully somewhere in the back, generally in the break room. And sometimes that can weigh you down. So I'd said, move on. Everyone should start moving more in this sector and experiencing all the joys of a new place and bringing new ideas and learning from other people. And that was completely wrong. I'm now finding myself kind of arguing the same stuff that I was arguing 3-4 years ago at my old joint. It's just with new people, but they look and act the same way. Which is not to say Swinburne's a bad place, and I really have enjoyed my time at Swinburne, and I've learnt a hell of a lot. And I've learnt from really, really cool people as well. So it has overall been a net positive, but it is pretty fascinating to find the same kind of archetypes, I would say, of characters that you find in different organisations. But that's a long way of saying that these talks are quite tricky to do. I was going to talk about Debt Notify, and I'm glad that in the end Rowan did instead, because he absolutely killed it. If you were in his session, he was fantastic. First time up on stage too, which is bloody incredible for such a kick-ass presentation. So thank you again, Rowan. I'm glad you did it. But I did a Debt Notify talk because I knew I was going to be doing this kind of the soft skills kind of thing here today. Instead, I did a Debt Notify talk at the Melbourne meet, and it's so much more, for me it was refreshing to do a technical talk, because I never do those. I always do these soft skills ones, and you feel like such a wanker when you get up on stage and you're telling people how people work, rather than here's this thing and it was an issue and then I wrote this script and now it works. Like, it's when you can test the theories, you feel a lot more confident. And so I was not feeling confident about this talk up until about a week ago, when then a whole bunch of stuff reinforced some of the things that I was thinking about for this talk, which was great because I hadn't actually started the talk. So I did get a whole bunch of really fresh examples of some of the stuff I wanted to talk about. Standard disclaimer for any of the talks I give is the views I express here today do not represent the views of any of the employers that I have worked for over the years. And this time, an extra one, I have changed the names to protect the innocent as well. But yeah, like I said, I worked at 2 universities in the last couple of years. It's incredible the similarities I've seen now between the 2 organisations. I've also talked with friends who work at other universities or who have left universities, and I hear the same stories. There are these patterns that happen, and the one that I find quite frustrating, the one that's been, it was more frustrating actually at my last gig, not to speak to, it was also a lovely place, but at my last gig there was one really big bugbear that we had, and it was a certain area that I believe was being overserviced. And like I said, defining overservicing is an incredibly hard thing to do because it's generally coming from a place of good. You know, like people are trying to provide excellent service to an area, a user, an organisation, us faculty, whatever it is, but they go a bit too far. Or they just, because they're trying to create a kind of familiar relationship with everyone, then IT process kind of gets ignored sometimes. And that seems to be the key to figuring out for me where overservicing is happening. Like if you look at these logos as they appear now, I'm sure for some of you, you know, especially some of those logos will have a visceral effect on you. You will know what to expect from that organisation, whether you're going to get good service, bad service, terrible service, you're just not going to be able to fly to Sydney one day. You know, you can tell what you're getting with those organisations, and that's the thing. It's like good service, really easy to spot. Bad service, really, really easy to spot. Over-servicing, really kind of weird and hard to define, I think, which ends up being arguments that I've had. And this is a terrible analogy, but I've spent months trying to think of a better one, so I'm just going to go with it, which is, you know, when someone's speeding, you know speeding is a bad thing, right? If you speed on a highway, you can kill yourself, you can kill other people. It's a bad thing to do. But going too slow on a highway is just as annoying. It's not dangerous, but it's annoying. And it slows everyone down around you. And it slows the flow of traffic around you. People have to get out of your way. And that's kind of where I feel, that's where I think you're seeing the effects of overservicing. If there's a certain part of your institution, area, whatever it is, that just everything takes so much longer to happen there, that could be a red flag to look for. So I got a checklist because I've never done this before actually in a talk. I've never had a bullet point slide, so first for me. Am I over-servicing an area? I think the big one to look for is, are incidents submitted without tickets? That's a big one. Do they just show up? I worked at one area where I'd get in the morning and there would be a MacBook. I'll talk to the microphone. I'd get into an area and there would be a MacBook sitting on my desk with a post-it note saying Bob. And everyone else who worked in this area knew that that was Bob's MacBook, and whatever thing he had been complaining about was the thing I had to fix. But I didn't know who Bob was, and I didn't care less. And so it was this really frustrating thing where they just expected this kind of like hands-on service that we did not have the resources to provide. And, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't ever think that I one day would be on stage talking about tickets and process. But here we are, and it pisses me off that I have to. But it's not a hard concept to understand that like every job should actually be recorded somewhere, just for the hell of it, you know, just for history's sake, it should be recorded. So yeah, that's one thing. Do people just drop stuff off and expect things to happen magically without a ticket, without whatever your current IT process? Do people play favourites with your team? And that's what I've seen as well. And, I've been the favourite for a while there as well. And it's kind of flattering, But I remember in one faculty, I was walking around at our old gig. I was walking down this one faculty, and I just noticed every single iMac had my name and mobile phone number stuck to the front of it. And it was, again, very flattering. And, I spoke to someone at the department, they were like, yeah, if we call you on your mobile, it gets fixed. And it was very nice to know that I had that kind of that trust in the organisation, but that doesn't scale. I like to go home at night. I like to go on holiday if I can. And so, you don't want someone to be that key to an area. There's if you've got an organisation where everyone knows that they call Michelle to get their stuff done and Michelle's going to fix it, well, that's great, except it puts way too much responsibility on Michelle's shoulders. She can never go on holiday. And it also just means that any of that information that should live on a wiki or should live somewhere else, it's living in her head and it goes on holiday with her. And so that's another big red flag that I've seen in some of the organisations I've worked for. Do you spend an inordinate amount of time creating tweaks and customizations for an area? Again, this is something that I've seen at universities. There tend to be very vocal areas of universities, certain faculties that would account for way more tweaks in our SOE than any other part of the organisation. And again, nothing particularly wrong with trying to customise your area, customise your experience for a certain group, if you've got the time and the resources. But it's just one of those things that so often people forget that there's a human resource attached to this stuff. And every time that you're sitting there, making sure that the doc has their favorite text editor in it is time that you're not preparing for the next major change that Apple's about to announce. And so again, just be really, really careful of that kind of stuff. And finally, the final big red flag for me is, do you worry about introducing new features because it might piss off a certain area of your organisation or a certain very vocal person in your organisation? Now, don't get me wrong, if someone is curing cancer and to cure cancer they need snow leopard, go for it. I don't care, that's fine. But if you just don't like how the new Photos app looks, then that's, same, I feel your pain, but we got to move on. And I am not going to support a version of the operating system that is really out of date because you don't like certain new features. And I guess at the end of the day, what I find really frustrating about this conversation, because I've had to have it a couple of times now, is when you speak to managers or IT directors or even faculty managers, they seem to understand the cost of a server. If you tell them that having a server at 5 nines uptime is going to cost you this amount of money and you don't have that amount of money, they're pretty quick to go, all right, yeah, well, I guess 2 nines is fine, But if you say to the same person, I can't be on call to that person, that VIP all the time, then that is not something that a lot of people that human resources aren't considered to be as, the costs aren't as obvious, which is bizarre because they're the first thing to get cut in any kind of reshuffle, but the actual cost of running a human and running a human into the ground is never really kind of focused on in some of these organisations. And I do find that really, really frustrating. I grew up, my parents were union organisers, so I didn't have much chance of not turning out this way. But and I've got to say, as a support staff, I've done the support of really highly overserviced areas, and it's just soul crushing. When you've got a bunch of really smart people holding people's hands all day long. There was this one area that had really close access to a help desk. And so whenever they couldn't find the HDMI adapter at the start of a lecture, they would walk down and yell at someone about it. And that person, whoever was getting yelled at, would walk up and plug in the HDMI adapter and the lecture would start. And UNSW, this was at UNSW, is a very big campus. It's a massive campus. And all the other 600 lecture theatres around campus that didn't have someone to yell at 30 metres down the hall, they figured it out. But the place where you could yell and be heard by the person in support, they yelled. And of course they got their way. And so, it's one of those things where are you allowing this stuff to happen just because of weird, quirks in geography of your location or just familiarity? And that's moving on. Before we move on to technical debt, which I definitely will get to, it's another concept that I haven't seen written anywhere else, which is weird. Did I invent something? That's cool. Which is familiarity debt. I'm sure it has been written somewhere. But yeah, I think familiarity debt is something I see so often at universities that I didn't really see. I've been so far out of the corporate culture or the corporate landscape for so long now. I don't know if any of this is true anymore, but when I was in kind of corporate land, they were a little bit less like this, I will say. But in universities, I have found that there is this kind of familiarity debt that is built in as well, where people don't want to change anything because it's been like that for years. And for some reason, our incredibly intelligent users who are, I never finished my degree, but they clearly teach people with degrees, so I assume they're pretty smart. They can't figure out how to, say, mirror a screen. Now, don't get me wrong, I get it wrong every time. Tony had to help me this afternoon, but it can be done. And a good example of this that I saw at Swinburne when I first started was DocuTill. Now, Rowan talked about it in his talk. Did you? No, it was your boss talked about it in the discussion earlier this morning. DocuTill is fantastic, or at least I thought it was when I first started. I thought it was really, really clever. It's a little Python script that basically sets a user's doc. And when I first started at Swinburne, we had DocuTill running in every single lab on every single login for every single user. And so if you got into a lab that had the entire Photoshop suite, DocuTill would kill your doc and then pop back up with the 98 apps that were installed on that machine. Wow. It was insane. I'm sure it was one of those things where, I could see, it's when you cut a tree and you can see the rings. I could see that how it started as a good idea and just morphed into this evil mess. It started as wouldn't it be great if Office was in the dock on staff machines? Yeah, that would be great. And then it became this thing where you would log into a lab machine, and especially there were certain labs where they were used by the film and TV department, the developer department, so they had all of Xcode and Android Studio and everything else like that, and then a whole bunch of other weird crap that you only ever see at universities. And so you get this doc that was just this tiny strip of tiny little dots, and it was hilarious. And half the time it didn't run anyway because we had so many login scripts, so many other weird little configurations like this that were happening at every single login that sometimes one of them just didn't work because there was just too much going on at login. So I thought that was a little bit ridiculous, and I wanted to get rid of it. And holy God, the amount of emails and discussions and the amount of torture it created to tell people, you know what, there's going to be a standard doc. And it's just going to have the stuff that people use the most in the labs. And if they need to find MATLAB, there's a bloody rocket that they can tap on and they can get to it that way, or they can open up the applications folder, or any other number of ways, the Spotlight. They're going to get through this. They're going to be okay. But honestly, the amount of discussion that we wasted, and they don't pay me much, but the people that they pay a lot were in meetings just constantly talking about this doc. I couldn't believe it. It was just, it was driving me nuts. This is another thing. So another thing I found really quite frustrating is one of the other login scripts that was happening was something that would set AV machines, so machines that the teachers used in a lab, to mirror on login. Now, I hate that behavior, first of all, because I don't really like doing anything that the user hasn't asked to do without telling them. And you're not going to stop and tell them what you're about to do. So I just didn't like that just kind of as a theoretical kind of idea. But then I also just didn't like it that I use presenter notes. I've got a lot, majority of my slides don't tell you anything about what I'm talking about. I use all my stuff is in the presenter slide. And so I want to be able to not have my screen mirrored. And I'm sure a lot of other people would behave the same way. And so someone somewhere, I looked back in the script and it was written in 2013 and it wasn't working half the time either. And so it was creating tickets that the AV department were getting, complaining about the SOE for a script written in 2013 that I didn't even know was there, because we had a lot of crap in our SOE. And the last 18 months has kind of been a fact-finding mission where I've just been like peeling back things going, wow, did it do that? Wow, who thought that was a good idea? Anyway, so instead I replaced it with an icon in the dock that you tap and it mirrors, and then you tap and it stops mirroring, and that's all it does. And again, the amount of meetings that this change went through, like I had to create that GIF after like the 14th email to go, that's what you do. The icon, you click it. That's it, clicking. It's fine now, and by the way, so that cost, again, I don't even want to think about how much the university spent in terms of managers having the discussion, because I'm sure the managers get paid very, very well. And they were in meetings quite a bit about this. It created 3 tickets in the 6 months since the changes happened. 3 people didn't know what had happened, and one of them was one of the managers. I am so getting fired. We might have to... Anyway, we'll move on. I'll discuss it later. This is Fed Square. Now, you might be familiar with it if you're from Melbourne. When it was first opened, The Age actually wrote that by the time it was finished, some Melburnians thought it was a horror. They thought it was so appealing and the worst thing they had ever seen. You may know that Apple wanted to stick an Apple store just there. Everyone hated Fed Square when it opened. As soon as Apple wanted to stick an Apple store in there, holy crap, everyone loved Fed Square. That is our square. How dare you come in there and change it?
Well, so Apple were going to knock that down?
Actually, the next build, this one here. Similarly, this time last year, I had no idea what franking credits were. I now still don't know what they are, but I know it cost this dude an election. We had, and this is an argument that we've had twice now. Well, I've had twice now, once at UNSW with the lovely Cameron over there, and now once at Swinburne. Data petitions. Data petitions were on every one of our lab machines. Now, data petitions are kind of like franking credits. They were introduced sometime during the Howard administration. They're used by less than 1% of our users. No one under 30 have any idea what they do. But if you try to get rid of them, you have angry boomers trying to kill you. Like, seriously. So, we finally got rid of them. We got rid of most of them. Film and TV are a holdout, but I'm going to push that through. Anyway, so yes, these are some of the frustrating things I've found that I would classify not as technical debt, more as familiarity debt. The things that people get used to. It's such a bummer because you get scared of introducing anything because you just know, like, actually that's a slide later. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later. But you might notice here, if you're looking at this is our current SOE that is deployed. I'll get back in front of the microphone, sorry. That is currently deployed to our labs. And it's quite pretty. You can see it does have a desktop background that is unique. It does have a dock that is set by a configuration profile rather than docutil. And it's funny, when I was like, every year Apple kind of changed the way setting the login screen and the desktop background is. And so I was bringing it up once in Slack when Mojave was first coming out, and someone actually in the Slack, in the Mac admin Slack, said, Why would you do that? That's just like, you're over-servicing, blah, blah, blah. I was like, touche. But I guess, that's the point here as well, is that one person's over-servicing and is another admin's like minimum viable product. Like, you do you. Like, whatever you think is your manageable thing to do in an organization. Like for me, I love changing the desktop background. It's a 20-minute job in Photoshop. It makes me feel good. And I just like the branding of it. I think that's one of the reasons why, Apple changes their dock and their background every time they release a new version of the operating system. It's just a very nice way of identifying what version of the OS is on that particular machine. And when we're in the middle of an 800 lab reimage at the moment, it's handy to walk into a room of 25 machines and go, hey, why is that one purple? And and be able to quickly see that there's a machine that got missed by one of the people who are reimaging. So for me, it serves a purpose. It's not just faffing about, but I can see for other people it would be faffing about. By the way, Rowan mentioned this in his talk. I do make my docs now with Profile Creator. I used to use Doc Master, which was also awesome. Profile Creator is fantastic just because you can actually just drag and drop apps straight into the doc window. And then if you sign them before you upload them to whatever your MDM of choice is, then they don't change at all. It's great. I really like it. And another thing to show that I'm a total hypocrite is I also stuck a little classic Mac in the menu bar because it's cute. I really like it. And to your question, this kind of basically replaces our asset tags. You click on the little Mac and it tells you what your IP address is, what your host name is, what your version of the OS is, and there's a little button where you can email all that information to support if you need to as well. So again, that for me is a value add, but and so it's not me over-servicing, it's just me just adding a little bit of fun as well, because it's it's the classic Mac, it's cute as hell. But I am always worried that whatever I might introduce into my environment, I will be supporting it till the day I die. So I'm very, very careful about what I do. And I guess the thing I find most frustrating about this idea of like, you can't change anything. You can't change anything in IT. Like, again, I get where it's coming from. Like, whenever you change anything, of course something's going to break. Something you didn't realize is going to happen. There's always unintended consequences. I get that, but there's just as many for not changing. I think that was the first talk I ever gave at XWorld. Was like we had to move to Jamf from our older LandRev, and it was no one wanted us to change then, but we had to. There was no way we could continue to manage our devices the way we had them, and so. I go back to that same discussion, which is if you don't want to work and support a changing environment, then what are you doing in this field? Like, since I started at Swinburne, that was 18 months ago, right? 18 months ago, Swinburne SOE was 10.12.6. You installed it over NetBoot. There were no T2 Macs in production. Since then, Heartbleed, Meltdown, Spectre, and Zombie Load have all come out. Our users have all moved from a volume license of Office 2016 to a single user license of Office 365. Right now, we're doing the exact same thing for Adobe products. All of our users and all of our labs are going to be a single license for Adobe. Apple released 10.13 with kernel extensions needing whitelisting. In our area, I discovered 34 different kernel extensions that needed whitelisting when you added up all of the sound decks, all of the weird crap that like engineering had, and then everything else from like the standard Dropbox and Google Drive and everything else. Then there was 10.14 with privacy preferences policy control, which is very hard to say. Again, had to whitelist a bunch of stuff. And then I had to explain to users that I couldn't whitelist a whole bunch of other stuff, so that yes, Skype is still going to ask for your microphone, even though clearly that's what Skype is, that's what it does. Yes, Apple. I don't know why either. So there are changes that Apple inflict upon our users. There are changes that we have to inflict upon our users just to keep up with the speed that Apple changes things. You can't sit around and just hope that you can maintain a stable environment in the Mac without any changes. It's just not going to happen. And of course, now we've got 10.15 coming out in September. When that goes live, 10.12 will fall out of support. Microsoft Office won't support 10.12 anymore. And neither will Adobe, actually, the new versions of Adobe that we are now currently running. And we have 400 Macs currently running 10.12 right now. So those 400 users are going to have to accept change, whether they like it or not. The point is, change is just a constant in this organization, in this environment. But on to technical debt and a clip art that I stole from the internet today. I can't believe, God, I must have been so tired when I wrote this. I actually included the Wikipedia definition. I'm going to skip that. There's a very long Wikipedia definition. I'm just going to say, it's the corners you cut today are going to bite you in the ass tomorrow. And that's a standard idea of what technical debt is. I think it can be a bit more than that as well. Sometimes it's the best intentions, like we were talking about earlier. Sometimes it's the best intentions that you have for your organization that come back and bite you in the ass. I may have an example later. And look, I know I studied film, and like I said, film and TV, and I dropped out. So I do apologize if this is all covered in Computer Science 101 or whatever, but I didn't do that, or whatever the degree is for this kind of this job. I don't know what it is. So yeah, if this is really obvious stuff, I do apologize. But for me, I had to kind of learn a lot of this the hard way. And so again, just as a form of therapy, I'm going to tell you today. I think we create technical debt for ourselves, not just when we want to look for that easy fix that we kind of know is like a shaky fix that I've done a bunch of them. There have been a bunch of things I've pushed out where I was like, oh, that's never going to work, or that's never going to be supported for much longer. But there are also times where, like I said, I'm trying to do the best by my users. I'm trying to give them, just trying to skate past some of those annoying pop-up windows or other things that I feel that kind of Apple might be overdoing it in certain areas. And I was listening to the Accidental Tech podcast probably 2 months ago now, when I was kind of formulating this idea. And they had a really great discussion. It was at the start of episode 322, if you want to take a note, where Marco Arment, one of the hosts of the show, is talking about his podcast app Overcast and the limitations of its watch app. And the way he talks about it is he says, look, it doesn't do half the stuff I want it to do, and that's a pain in the ass, and it's really bad to ship a product that I know is not a product I'm really proud of, but I could work around it. First of all, if I do that, Apple are probably going to ban me from the store if I go too far into skating around what they provide for me publicly. And I don't think they're finished with the Apple Watch SDK. So I could put in 6 months worth of extra work to make this watch app behave as good as I think it could. And then they're probably going to release a new version of the Apple Watch SDK, and all that work is going to be pointless, and there'll be a tick box or something similar that will do all the work that I've just re-engineered myself. And as it turns out, Apple completely changed their SDK. A month ago, they announced the new version of SwiftUI, and that's heavily watch focused. And a lot of that stuff is now, a lot of the stuff he was hoping for, so streaming audio, is now available for him to use. And that's the same way I kind of look at some of the limitations I find when I'm playing around with, say, parts of the MDM that aren't fully featured, or even parts of Jamf's implementation of profiles that aren't fully available to me, when I can see that, I have a couple of tick boxes over here, but they're not available in Jamf, I could rewrite that whole thing, or I could just go, you know what, right now it's a pain in the ass, and we will get to it. So I love that. I loved that quote. It's not that profound. After I wrote it down, I realized, no, it's not that profound. But I did like it at the time. I stopped. I was on Smith Street in Fitzroy, and I immediately stopped, and I was like, this is gold. Everyone's going to clap. And you didn't. But but yeah, it's a really, really great discussion. And it's really worthwhile thinking about that kind of stuff. Like, what are you over-engineering now that is probably going to be a feature later? Is it worthwhile putting that much effort into certain areas? And by the same token, like a good example that I didn't put in the slides, but we have this a custom-built app that lives in the dock that you click on it and it launches it mounts a file server. The file server is used by bugger all people. But again, of course, it's a thing that exists, so if I take it away, people are going to kill me. So I've been told to remake this app. But right now, I can remake it really, really quickly, but then I have to notarize it and sign it if I want to think it's going to last for a while, when no one uses it. Like, why? So that's an argument for future PD when he gets home. And I'm not looking forward to it. But it's just one of those things that I see kind of popping up. And again, it's not just because I'm lazy. That is definitely part of it. But I just feel that I have a certain amount of time and a certain amount of kind of spin cycles in my brain that I can devote to this kind of stuff. I'm not going to spend it on something that I feel very few of our users are going to benefit from. This is the user template or the Ark of the Covenant. Which Apple and Jamf still allow you to kind of mess with, which I kind of wish they didn't, because I still do, because they let me. And I kind of wish, it's a scary little place, because like you can throw stuff into it, but then you can't ever look into it unless you turn off SIP, and that's a whole pain in the ass. So you just kind of throw stuff in there and you hope you're not breaking every one of your users who logs onto a machine after that. I think that's terrible. I think that's a really bad way of creating things, but I still use it because it's there. I actually do wish that Jamf, if there are Jamfy people in the room, hello. I wish that they would create something like, say, the waiting area in software deployment, something like that, but for user profiles. Basically, just being the user template, but in a way that I can look into the folder and not be scared. But yeah, I'm bringing this up because there was a great tech support knowledge base article years ago. It's not there anymore, but this is how I feel about the user template at the moment. Does anyone recognize what that's from? Yeah? What is it?
It's from, I think Quinn the Eskimo wrote it, someone like that. But it was, don't tinker with this area even though you can. But I can't remember the exact thing it was. Sorry.
Well, that was actually on Apple's support page. Yeah. Okay, so it was like, the original was sync services on their support page. But it was just like, as if it was a swarm of bees, stay away from the sync services folder, which I just love. Like, that is such a beautiful, I wish they had that kind of, joy in their communications these days. But anyway, like I said, I still use it every now and again, but I've started in the last year or so moving away from anything that touches the user folder, and I've gotten really, really careful about that. And I've started to kind of, about a year ago, I itemized everything that was writing to the user folder. And if it was a DMG in our Jamf, and again, sorry, this is really Jamfy, but if it was a DMG in our Jamf and it didn't write to the user folder, it had to be replaced with a package. That was my rule, just so that when scanning over a list of packages, I could see if it was a DMG, it wrote to the user folder, therefore bad things might be in there. So, that's a first place to look if something's bad.
Can we even write to that folder in Catalina?
I don't know yet. But anyway, I wouldn't be surprised if we couldn't.
I think you're over-servicing.
Fair enough. But anyway, so the funny thing was, since my very first week at Swinburne, there was a package in our deployment for all computers in the DEP workflow called User Template Fix. and it would repair permissions on each user's account as they first logged in. And I was able to kind of there wasn't a lot of information on what the package actually did, okay? There wasn't a lot of information on what the package did, but I went through and I was able to kind of find what I thought was a Jamf Nation thread that explained why someone had put it into our workflow back from 2016, of course. And I went through there and I quickly had a look at it, and one of my bosses was in the thread, so I'm pretty sure it is based on that one. Anyway, it started, it had been there for ages. Who the hell knows what it was fixing, but it was there fixing user templates, right? Since 2016. I looked in, at the start of this year, it stopped working. It started actually doing even more damage to user template folders. So I really needed to get it out of the way. Now, unfortunately, I started very early on in my my lab refresh for this year, the start of this year, just because there was a planned outage coming up in late January that I had to work around. And that went off without a hitch. That was really great. But it just meant that I'd missed a whole bunch of kind of prep, almost a month of prep for labs. And so because of that, none of my lab machines were logging in without seeing that, except without the thumbprint. And you'd see this like 400 times on a standard login, which was not a great experience. And so in the end, I hit it with a hammer. And I wasn't proud of this fix, but it worked. And it basically just like the affected files, because we had just so much customization. It was already like, I wasn't seeing this at all in the staff profile because I had rewritten the staff workflow from scratch. But the labs workflow was so big and so scary. It was like a 900 line code. It was scary. It was just really, really scary to touch. And so I just thought, look, whatever is in there that's breaking stuff, I will get to it. We erased all of the keychains on a user's first login, which was a pain in the ass, but it was only a minor pain in the ass. Basically, the only thing, after a bunch of testing, the only thing we found was that Premiere wouldn't launch on the very first login without a keychain for some reason, even though we weren't using a signed, at that stage, a signed version of Premiere. It was a weird bug. Maybe they were using the same code base. I'm trying to talk about, how much do I have?
Minus 2 minutes.
Oh, bloody hell. So anyway, I tested it, 800 max, it went through, it was fine. No one complained. And so I knew I was ready to go do my Xworld talk. And then last week, just before I started getting ready, of course, I had written the semester 2 labs image from scratch as well. And so it wasn't appearing in any of my S2 builds. But of course, then there were a whole bunch of labs who just wanted their stuff just in place upgraded, and they were messing up. And if you saw the emails that I got, oh my God, it would be like, this was a P1 problem, even though it affected, I counted 7 users. But anyway, I went through and I found, because I'd gone through and made sure that anything that wrote to a user template was a DMG, I was able to go through and look at this. And I just love this because this was just one of like the 700 different little configurations that we had on our labs. But going through, there's something beautiful about the fact that Adobe software that we were paying millions of dollars for as an organization was not working because in 2016, someone wanted to set how a mouse worked. And that was the thing. It was the mouse, Apple Mouse Settings 2.0 was screwing up our user template folder. So I created a remove junk. I deployed it. It removed all the junk, and now it works. And I guess I was going to tell you examples about, originally, I was going to tell you examples about Android Studio and Visual Studio and all of these crazy kind of applications that have like 700 gig worth of SDKs that you're supposed to download, and all the craziness that like the Rube Goldberg machine that I created to make sure that they all slotted into the correct spot. But I actually like the examples being so dumb in this one because it just shows like the amount of effort we put into maintaining stuff that no one even notices or cares about. And so best practice these days, oh yeah, there he is. Best practice these days, I try to do a configuration profile first. If that fails, I do a script. If that fails, and only if that fails, then I will touch the user template. But as you said, probably not going to be able to do it in Catalina. I hope so, because I shouldn't be allowed in there. And yeah, I will just quickly end with this. You know, part of being a good admin is knowing when you're wrong as well. So I have actually started re-implementing DocuTill because it's kind of cool. Thank you.